even our very own God Almighty terminated workers throughout the Bible. In this video, I'm going to be talking about employee strategy, tactic 3. And I'm going to be discussing pay cuts, layoffs, redundancies, and more. Join me to find out. Hello, hi, welcome to my channel, Kingdom Business Sense. I'm Anita Wiafe-Asinor of OML Africa, an entrepreneur and a HR and business consultant. In this video, I'm going to be talking about tactic 3, employee strategy for COVID-19. COVID-19 has brought us many headaches, and it has meant that as business owners, we've had to put together a business survival continuity plan, of which an employee strategy forms part of this plan. Now, when we're looking at our employee strategy, there are two main areas I'm going to discuss in this video. That is the variation of contracts, and under that will be cost cutting and labor reduction, and then I'm going to look at employee communication as well. Starting with variation, what does this mean? What does it mean to vary a contract? Well, if you're employing people, it means you have some form of employment contract with them, and within that you'd have agreed how much you're going to pay them, how much leave they're entitled, sick pay, all kinds of terms will be in there. So we have found ourselves in a situation where we have to vary the contracts that we have with our employees because some of us are not able to meet the obligations in those contracts, mainly pay, all right, and even keeping them in terms of job security in their jobs. So that means we have to vary the contract, and varying the contract means we have to go to the employees and explain transparently to them the situation and then propose to them how we intend to vary their contract in order to survive COVID-19. So how does this work? Okay, so variation is coming in different forms. The first one is in relation to cost cutting, and that is really impacting on pay, where companies are reducing pay, all right? And what I want to say here is that yes, it is a cost cutting initiative in order to survive as part of overall cutting of expenses and reduction of cost. But when we're doing the reduction in salary, we really must think about the burden on the employees, all right? So, you know, really you want to try in as far as possible to stay under the 50% cut mark in as far as possible, and really maybe play around with allowances and benefits, which is far better than cutting the main base salary and then also all of the allowances. So we need to think about that, and then also we have to remember that we cannot cut salaries below the minimum wage. We still need to maintain the laws and rights on the minimum wage. If you pay someone below the minimum wage, you're literally making them very, very worse off. So these are some of the things you need to consider when you're thinking about cutting pay, and be very clear as to how you wish to cut the pay and how much you're going to cut and for how long. You know, for example, on ground, working with my clients, some clients may say, okay, we're only going to cut 30% off base salary, we're only going to then cut 50% of allowances and benefits, but they may not apply it all in one go. Sometimes what we've been doing is that we've been looking at the different levels of salaries and applying. So maybe those on the higher end, we may apply 20% cut. Those on the lower salaries, we may initially apply maybe let's say 15%, and each month we've been moving it according to what comes into the cash flow. So you can vary. You don't have to do it all at once. You could do it by income levels as well to make it a little bit more balanced. Okay, outside of pay is also reducing hours. Has the same effect. It reduces the pay. So working hours, some companies have taken their work home. We, for example, as a consultancy, we're working very much from home because we can, and we're providing remote support to our customers as well as going on site to support them. So it's meant that, of course, some jobs in the back office are not necessarily doing 40 hours a week. So we can opt to try and reduce those hours as part of our cost activities. So you could also look at that. Which jobs now are not really working 40 hours, and then of course you can look at reducing some of those hours. You may also be paying salaries, which is fixed, but you may now consider temporarily, can you move to wages, which means you pay employees as they work. So if you work, you get paid. That's also something that you can look at. There are also things like job sharing, which is also a good idea. That's another way of keeping more people in work, where it's not one person doing a job, two persons do the same job, and you share the pay between them. That's also something to consider. Again, it will mean a reduction in their salary. So again, as part of the conversation of varying their contract, you would have to explain that. There's a lot of things that you can do when it comes to pay variations, and I hope some of these tips will get you thinking in the right direction. The other thing also after pay is that we are looking at of course reducing our head count, so reducing the number of workers, and this is really being done either temporarily or permanently. So temporarily, we are laying people off or letting them take leave of absence, or they're taking career breaks, or they're taking their leave that maybe they've accumulated. So that's a short term. In the long term, we may be doing more redundancies and mutual terminations. The issue here is that we don't want to lose our best talent. Finding good talent is very, very difficult, meaning finding good workers. So you really got to look at how you manage both your temporary and permanent activities. So for your temporary layoffs, or if you're asking people to go on career breaks or leave of absence, you really want to think about whether some of the people you're asking are some of your top talent, and then see what you can do there. So for example, with some of my clients, what we've done is that where we can't really keep all the critical staff, but we don't want to lose them because we will need them as we move into the new normal, what we've done is that we've agreed like a nominal allowance to give them, to kind of as a way of retaining them and letting them know that we really very much want them, we just can't afford to have all of them, and we've had to select the critical staff who are kind of going to work us through into the new normal, and at the appropriate time we're going to bring them back. So that's a way of keeping your top talent, not losing them, because remember that of course when you lay them off even temporarily unpaid, they are back in the market, they can look for other jobs, they can't take up other opportunities. So you need to think about ways to deal with that. And then of course there are redundancies. You want to think about using an objective selection criteria, which will mean that you select those who are really needed, and you let go of those roles or people who are not needed. I just want to say that this is also the time, to really look at people who are not performing or who are breaching policies, who are not your best employees, and you need to, maybe this is the time to kind of part company. On the topic of redundancy, brings me to the point. In the book of Genesis 2:15, we are told that God appoints Adam in the Garden of Eden and tells him to work the garden and of course take care of it. In King James's version, it says to dress and keep the garden. So he was asked that was his job, to manage the garden. And then of course Adam breached the terms and conditions that God had given him, and we see in Genesis 3:21 he makes some garments for them and gives it to him and Eve, and in Genesis 3:23 we see him terminate them, banish them, drive them out of the Garden of Eden, and he allows them to go out and they can work on the land to survive. So we can see in that instance there, our first example of termination on the grounds of redundancy, and God did not let them go empty-handed, even though they had breached his terms and he was asking them to go, he still made sure they were okay before leaving. So if you are going to do redundancies or mutual terminations, or even have a conversation to end an agreement with people who have been working with you a long time, that perhaps you don't have contracts with them, and this happens a lot with entrepreneurs who are kind of been working informally with workers for years, 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, and now they're in a situation where they can't also afford to keep all of them, and some have just told some of them to just go home and so on and so forth. That's not the best. You need to sort them out in some way because they've been of good service to you, and I hope that the example I've just given about God and Adam should encourage you to do the right thing by those employees. You cannot just unilaterally just terminate people without doing the due process and doing the right thing that aligns with the law. The laws of employment law and labor laws have not changed amid COVID-19. It is understanding that we're in a challenge that we've not had to face before, but the law very much expects us to handle these issues well, and if we fail to do so, we will have to answer to the law, and the law will go according to what has been written. So please, do take time to make sure you handle these things well. And if you decide you want to make people redundant, remember that each jurisdiction is different. In some countries, the governments have set what the redundancy rate should be, so you just apply it unless the company offers more than what the government has stipulated. In other jurisdictions, it tells you have to negotiate the redundancy, so in which case you will negotiate the redundancy with with the people who are at risk of redundancy. Please make sure you follow the due process so you don't have any issues of litigations, of complaints after COVID-19. So now moving on to look at mutual terminations. Mutual terminations come in where maybe, let's say, you don't actually have money for redundancy right now because of the crisis, or actually maybe someone is on a contract. There's still quite a number of years, so I can move on to talk about the fixed term contract. Maybe it's a fixed term contract and there's still got maybe another year or two on it, and you haven't negotiated an early termination clause, meaning saying that you terminated early in case of A, B, and C. So you need to have a mutual discussion with them to terminate their fixed term contract early. So you may use mutual termination there. Maybe it's also somebody that you want to terminate their role, but actually you want to discuss with them about it to come to an agreement without actually going through the long-winded redundancy process. That's also there. So mutual termination is where we both agree to end the employment contract. All right, so that's also there for you to use, in addition to redundancy, layoffs, and some of the things I've already said. Okay, so these are some of the options you have on there. Then there are other ways as well that you can do the reduction of labor. So you may have temporary or casual workers on contracts, okay? In all jurisdictions, there's a lot more flexibility around these types of contracts because they are meant to be temporary, they're not permanent staff. So you can kind of look at how many of them you have and whether actually, for example, I just made about the fixed term contract, there may be some fixed term contracts coming to an end. So you can decide that you're not going to renew those contracts and that will just be the end of that, no issue there. There may be also temporary or casual workers that actually you took them on and now actually because of the situation you can't afford to keep them on, you have to reduce your operations, etc. So you can also discuss with them and end those contracts accordingly there as well. You may also be using an agency who are supplying you workers who are not your employees. You just source them through the agency. You may want to consider as well whether you kind of need those workers right now, and if you don't, you can just tell the agency you kind of no longer require those services of those employees. They are not your employees, they are the agency's employees, so you're not carrying the liability there. And of course your ability to do this as well will be dependent on what agreement you have with the agency. But I'm saying that of course if you have workers that are not direct workers, they're coming through an agency, you may want to look at maybe do you need those workers now in addition to all of your assessments that you're doing, and you may decide to freeze those workers and actually try and save a lot more of your permanent critical staff. So that's something to also consider. Now, there is a category of workers that I have seen with the entrepreneurs These are with some of them, they are employing people who they've had for a long time. They've got no legal documents with them. They've become attached to their businesses, and now in COVID-19 they are obviously having challenges, as I'm discussing now, and now they don't know what to do with these employees. I want to implore you that we labor experts know that regardless of the fact that you haven't written on paper an agreement with them, they are your employees. All right, if an employment relationship can be proven, they are your employees. So I want to encourage you to handle them well. Don't just get up and just terminate them. Just as I've explained, go through a process, and if you're going to terminate them, of course, make sure that you agree some kind of redundancy or some kind of payment or something for them to take. So this is a very difficult time for all of us. We know nobody enjoys terminating anybody, but at the end of the day, we are a business and we have to do what's right for our businesses. So if you have people who are not really productive, who are not really following the rules, who are not really pulling their weight, who have kind of been deadlogs that you've been carrying along all this while, this would be a good time to kind of lose them and keep your best workers. We have to be honest and frank as well. Of course, we're going to do this very sensitively with empathy and compassion, but it doesn't take away from the fact that nobody needs underperformers right now. We all need people who are willing to work, roll up their sleeves to support us out of this situation. So some of the objective criteria you could look at will be looking like, people's length of service. You can look at behavior conduct, like, their attendance level, their commitment level to the organization. You can look at their performance and results over the last 3 years, perhaps. You can look at, the results they bring in. You can look at key things that are substantiable, and then you use that as a criteria to evaluate all the people who fall under the pool that you'd like to make redundant or even lay off, and then you make a selection, making sure that you select correctly. But at the same time, this is also a very good time to also get rid of people who are not really adding much value. So that's in relation to variation. There's also contract variations, where now some companies are also renegotiating the contracts. They're not trying to do variation. They've just come and said, we can't really honor this contract in the near future. We want to renegotiate. So that means once they've renegotiated the new terms, they end the existing contract and then they sign a new contract. You can also go to your employees and say that to them, that this is what we can't meet this in the long term, even in the next 6 to 12 months, or even beyond that. We want to relook at everything and re-agree a new contract. You can also go to them to discuss. If they agree, you end their existing contract and then you enter into a new contract. Now, this is very important. In doing all of this, whatever is done, as I said at the beginning, you really need to communicate with the employees concerned, and then you take the action. Make sure you have a paper trail for everything, and then you make sure the appropriate steps are taken to make sure at every point the documents are signed, so that you have a record in case in future there are any disputes. The next thing to do is the employee communication plan. You need to have a communication plan for your employees. What I have found working really well is being very transparent and open and honest, so people can see what is happening. This will be the time to let employees know, these are the costs we're managing, this is what is coming in, because sometimes employees can think that just because money is coming into the business, you have money and maybe you're still trying not to pay them their full salaries. They need to understand that there are costs to running the business, and that this is the reasons why some of these actions are being taken in relation to varying their contracts. Actually, one of the things that's also true is that even COVID has brought additional costs. We now have to look at costs of people working from home, providing them with internet, laptops, and so on. So there are additional costs that have come in. So make sure they understand really what is happening on income and expenditure in as far as possible. Keep it simple, but let them know that when they see invoices coming in, that does not mean that's it, the money, that's it, it can just be spent. There are salaries, there are bills to pay, and so on. Be very open and transparent, let them understand, so that it makes it easier to have some of these difficult conversations. The other thing you want to focus on is really when you're communicating with them is to really give them an update on how the company is responding to COVID, and then also how this impacts them. So that's some of the things I've talked about, how it impacts their job security, their pay, etc. And then of course safety, how you plan to keep them safe as well should always be the three areas that you're covering when you give the employee updates. You need to decide on the frequency of the updates. Is it daily, weekly, monthly? You need to decide that, be consistent, and actually give them the updates. Also allow in the forum to people to ask questions. Really work with your managers and directors, etc., to also be the other voice. Don't just be the owner or the CEO having to communicate everything. Do work with your managers, supervisors, team leads to help you to also answer and communicate with employees. I would say use variation in style as well. You know, some may be one-to-one conversation, some may be groups, some may be even 2 or 3, some may be by department. You know, vary it a bit so that, you know, you get to interact and it's a bit interactive and people feel they can speak. Also offer those who don't really like to speak in public of opportunity to have access to ask questions or discuss things through email or you know, other channels that you may have in your business. Then use the methods to communicate that your business uses. So do you have a WhatsApp group? Do you have a team collaborative platform that you're working? Is it email? Is it an intranet? Whichever methods you use to communicate in your organization, that will be the channel you will use to give the announcements to your staff concerning what is happening in the business, concerning their roles and how the business is responding to COVID. And of course, very important is about their safety. So I know it's very challenging, you know, dealing with this issue, and we are not finding it very easy. It's quite difficult, you know, but it's very necessary. You know, we have to have a strategy to deal with our employees, and I hope that this has been very useful for you. At least it's going to point you in the right direction as you think through your strategy to deal with your employees. Okay, I hope you find this very useful. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like and share, and of course, do share your comments on how you are going about managing your employees and also how you are going about dealing with some of the difficult situations. So thank you very much. As always, it's always a pleasure to be here to share insights with you. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about the customer strategy. What strategies do we need to do to communicate with our customers in order to get them to get the confidence to come and buy our products and services? So I'm going to be talking about that tactic. So I hope you join me. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you and goodbye.